Thank you for joining me on the Sports in the Making podcast. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Being a sports broadcast producer isn't just formulating game coverage for the audience. It also involves skills that can make or break a show. My guest on this episode has worked some of the most prestigious events in sports during his career and has been instrumental in producing events for global audiences, working alongside many accomplished announcers and athletes. And he's also been an important part of negotiating to make sports happen. We'll get into that and more on episode 29 of Sports in the Making. This episode has visuals, so if you're listening, please be sure to subscribe to the Sports in the Making YouTube channel to see some of what we discuss. One of the most versatile producers that I've ever come across in this business is with me on this episode of the Sports in the Making podcast, Brian Williams, who's done everything from Wimbledon to US Open to the Masters to hockey. I mean, you name it, he's probably done it. And I have him on today to talk a little bit about his career, as well as what goes into what we do to make sports happen and what you see on the viewing side of television sports. So, Brian, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate it.
Don, thank you. It's great to be on your show, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about versatility. And maybe that just means I can't get anything right, so they put me on something else.
Yeah, I've kind of felt that way myself because my background happens to be with international sports a lot and not on those A productions, but those you just go one route and you work your way into it. So it's not as easy as you would think. How did you get into the sports broadcasting industry? Go into a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, I'm part of the Syracuse Mafia, and there's a lot of us out there, both on the on-air talent grid and producers and directors, and worked with a lot of great Syracuse Newhouse guys and ladies over my career. I actually went to a 2-year community college before transferring to Syracuse University, where I finished up at Newhouse. In Poughkeepsie, New York, Dutchess Community College, and after that went back to teach after going to Syracuse University. Worked in local radio in Poughkeepsie and taught at the community college, Dutchess. And the greatest thing about that is one of my students walked in one day, and 35 years later, she is my wife now, Janice. And I will say that while she was a student of mine for a couple of years, it was a teacher-student relationship. We just reconnected 5 years later after she graduated and I moved on. Anyway, so I taught for a few years and then literally packed up my Chevy Nova one day in 1982 and drove to New York City and got an apartment on Riverside Drive. And fortunately, I had an interview lined up with USA Network and got the job at USA Network, and that was the beginning.
That was, I was surprised to hear when we talked a couple of days ago before doing this, that USA Network really was a network that was carrying a lot of sports at that time.
Yeah. At that time, and this is 1982, they were the ESPN of television in the United States. I mean, we had the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, a great boxing schedule, tennis, indoor soccer and outdoor soccer, and basically I was an associate producer and the guy that was cutting teases and features and sending those to the producers on site, and in some cases bringing in games to our facility in Alpine, New Jersey at that time, and our job was to make all this make sense, but that was the sports channel, USA Network at that time, that you could watch all of what is now really what ESPN does. I think we talked briefly the other day, and I mentioned that one thing I did on the weekends is I would take in college football games in the fall of 1982 and cut them down to 1-hour shows. Now, a lot of these shows, they were Pac-10 shows and Big Ten shows, and our job was to cut them down to 1 hour. The first show I got in, and the date was in November 20th, 1982, and it was the Cal-Stanford game. And back then, this was a regionally televised game on the West Coast, I guess. It wasn't shown nationally, and our job was to cut it down to a 1-hour show and put it on for national later on in the week. And that was the play game. And I didn't know anything about this because you didn't watch SportsCenter at that time. I didn't know. I saw the final score was Cal 25-20. But I didn't realize, and I'm editing this show down to 1 hour and scanned ahead and saw the play at the end where Cal returns the onside kick through the Stanford band into the end zone to win the game 25-20. And I'm saying, maybe I need to give that a little more time at the end and show that play. And so that's how I saw that game for the first time, and much of America saw it for the first time.
Yeah, and that's, what I'm trying to capture in this podcast is getting stories like that, because a lot of people that we work with, our colleagues, we never see or hear from. It's always the announcers or the athletes. And when I have conversations, whether it be over lunch or an event that we're working on, and I hear these things, it's like, oh, that's really interesting, but nobody really knows that. Nobody hears about it. And so that's why, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on. And, we met back in 2014 at the Boston Marathon. The year after the bombing. I was there for 2013 and found out that you were not there, but you had been covering it for years prior to that.
Yeah.
We can talk about that in a little bit, but one of the things that I noticed when working alongside you handled the world feed. I was working with NBC/Universal Sports to cover the national coverage. But I noticed how connected you were with everyone, every single part of that operation. As a producer, how do you explain to people what you have to be responsible for at an event like that?
Okay. Well, in that case, as you know, we provide a world feed. Bruce Troit, who has directed more marathons than anybody in the world, I'm sure, directs that show still, and I produce it. And in that case, NBC Universal was taking the world feed show and creating your own show for the USA domestic audience. Our job in a case like that in the world feed is to work closely with you and Eurosport and all the networks around the world that are taking this and try to give everybody what they need for their audience. And in a case like that, the Boston Marathon, we're doing a world feed. We're cutting the race, and it's being sent around the world. And in Sweden, they're calling it off of monitors in Swedish. And down in South Africa, they're calling it in English or other languages down there. In China, they're calling it in dialects of Chinese dialects. And so it's put in different languages. I think we go to it's in 22 different languages in 220 countries and areas around the world. And in most cases, just about all the cases, they're taking the feed and calling it off of monitors locally and making it make sense to that local audience, or give it that. So our job there is really to cover the race. I mean, we don't do a whole lot of features because that is, you don't want to put what we call talking heads, English-speaking commentary. We do provide English commentary, and now that's Sam Rosen and Larry Rawson calling the English commentary. Back then it was Al Troutwig and Larry Rawson calling the English commentary. But that's just to the English-speaking countries. The rest of it is we provide international sounds and pictures to the rest of the world so they can put it in their native languages.
It's a pretty complex operation. You've got multiple TV trucks, multiple networks, multiple people you're having to coordinate with. How do you manage all of that?
Well, you have a good AD that is on with everybody and coordinating all of that. But you really do this enough, and you know what everybody's wants to see. I mean, again, in your case, you had control of the cameras. So you could take our world feed, or you could cut in the lead vehicles. And if your talent is talking about an American runner, Bruce would separately talk to that moto cameraman and say, get a shot of that runner they're talking about. That doesn't go out over the world feed, but that is fed to you at NBC Universal, so you can put that on and your talent can be talking about that individual runner. So it's really, if you do this enough, you know what everybody's looking for, and you can make for the most part, everybody happy with the pictures you're feeding them.
Yeah, and being in the control room when you're working, most people I'm sure have seen pictures of control rooms, but they can be very complex. So I have a couple of photos that I'd like to show you of what it's like in there, and this is you. It looks like it's early in the production day, so but kind of if you can describe what people are looking at here. And again, it's not fully set up, but what are some of the things on the monitor that you see that you can describe?
Yeah. Well, in this case, the director, Bruce Troit, he has all his cameras there. So he can see all of the cameras, every option he has for taking the camera shots to cover the race. We're also seeing on monitors our graphics feed. So we're watching every graphic that our graphics guys and ladies are building in the back for use in the show. We also have monitors showing our EVS, what we used to call tape machines. We still call it tape machines. I do anyway. Tape machines. To show our video replay services. We have all of those in there. We'll have things like net return, so we can show we can see what's going out to the world and what maybe you are showing at that time, NBC Universal, So we're basically seeing everything that could be put out over the air, and it's up to the producer and the director to make those selections of shots and tape elements and graphic elements that go out to the world, and in some cases just go to the domestic US feed. Right. And it's really, I tell you what, I always say this, I get more frustrated and nervous making a budget for a show than I do sitting in this and watching 50 monitors and talking to 100 people on a headset. To me, I'm most comfortable doing that and not so comfortable hiring and firing people and making budgets, to be honest with you.
As I mentioned before, you've worked a lot of international global events, Wimbledon. We're seeing the control room here from that. Yeah. There's a lot of redundancy. It looks like there's a lot of the same things, but they're serving different purposes. Sure. And so when you're in a production, how complicated can it be in putting stuff? And I say this because when dealing with international, from what you've explained to me and I've experienced, is you're not just serving one client. It's not just going linear to one channel in the US. It's going to multiple countries, multiple outlets. I think with Wimbledon, the US Open, and even golf, they have their own dedicated channels for certain coverage. So how complicated can it be for you bouncing around there?
Yeah, it's all about communications. It's all about, that's one thing that the really good people in our business, as you know, Don, they're good communicators, and I like to think of myself as a fairly good communicator. And it's really, you put together a rundown of a show, and we send that to the world so they know what's coming. We go on the air at 9 o'clock local time or 9:30 local time in Boston. And they know exactly what's going to happen at 9:00. And we're going to do a tease. We're going to do an open, no on cameras, but we're going to introduce our announcers. We're going to give the weather. Then we're going to show off of tape the wheelchair start that took place 20 minutes ago. And then we're going to show, that's the men's wheelchair start. And we're going to show 3 minutes of that race and go back to the start line again for the recording of the women's wheelchair start that took place 5 minutes later. And we're going to show some of that. And then we're going to show some of that race, and then we might do a Hopkinton Scenic to show where they're going. And then get back to the start line in time to show the actual live coverage of the men's start, the men's elite start. And then show some of that race for 5 minutes and do a couple of feature elements, the course map, that kind of thing, and then get back to the start line again live to set up the women's elite race. So all of this, we're sending this out to everybody around the world. And of course, we have our production meetings in Boston to go over all of this so that everybody the people, the guys that work in the start line, the people that are taking this world feed and the domestic feed. Everybody knows what they can expect, and to me, that's the biggest challenge, making sure everybody understands what they're going to see and sticking to that rundown. Now, there's things that happen where you lose cameras or something doesn't happen right on the announcement of the introduction of the runners at the start line is a minute late, and you have to readjust. But if you put out a rundown, a good schedule, and everybody understands that, and you answer the questions ahead of time, you're much better, much more likely to be successful when you're live.
Yeah, and you mentioned it too, and I felt the same way. Being in that control room is comfortable. It's all the stuff leading up to it. When you're talking about doing an event, how far ahead are you looking forward to that, to producing that event? Because it's not just showing up, having a rundown, saying, here you go. What is the process that you take, at least for some events that you've done, and how complicated can that be?
Yeah. I mean, you're really starting on the next year's, in the case of the Boston Marathon, as soon as this marathon is over. I mean, we all do our post-mortem, paperwork, and get together on the phone and say, here are the 5 things that we did maybe not as well as we should have done. We did this great and this great and this great, but we can tweak this. And they can be as little as things like, the bibs on the runners need to be a little bit bigger because you can't quite see them. When that moto drops back to cover the race, that moto has to be shooting the runners coming at you, not behind them. There's times when you've done marathons when you lose signals out on the course. That has to be improved. So there's things that, in the case of the Boston Marathon, we are literally, getting together, the week after, and starting to prepare for next year.
You just finished recently the U.S. Open, Serena's last hurrah there. Describe what the mentality was going into this event and then how you executed it.
Okay. Well, the show that we do, we can talk more about this, is the Directv ESPN Plus shows. And our job, basically, we do the day sessions, and our job is to basically put out 5 channels of television on the 5 courts that have English commentary. And ESPN, if you have the ESPN Plus service, the first week you could have watched any one of 10 or 12 courts on a given day. Only the first 5 courts, Ash, Armstrong, Grandstand, Court 17, and Court 5, had English commentary. But there's 7 other courts with robotic cameras that if you just wanted to watch a player that's playing out on Court 11 that you liked or you knew, you could watch that with just international sound, ball hits and that with no announcers, but you could watch that match if you have the pay service, the streaming pay service, ESPN Plus. So to answer your question, there's a lot of different balls being juggled out there and a lot of ways you can watch the tennis out there. I didn't produce, I wasn't working when Serena played her first 3 matches, but that was great television.
Some of the perks, because you get to watch a lot of those things, right?
Yeah. I was thinking when we're putting some notes together for this podcast, I actually produced in 1989, it was September 5, 1989, Chrissy Everett's last match at the U.S. Open. It wasn't her last match playing tennis, but it was her last U.S. Open match. She announced that she was retiring at the end of the year. And on that day, she lost to Zina Garrison. It was a quarterfinal match on a Tuesday afternoon at the U.S. Open, and she lost it. Everybody thought she was going to win and go on to the semifinals where CBS would pick up the coverage. But at that point, and Bruce Troit was directing and I was producing her final match. Fast forward now 30-something years, and Serena's playing her what could be her final match. And I think the USTA and ESPN did a great job covering and presenting that whole scene afterwards where she wins the match, and they basically paid this tribute to her in video, and Gayle King coming down and speaking, and Billie Jean King coming out and speaking. It was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And it dawned on me as I'm watching this how great this is. But 30 years ago, when Chrissy Everett lost her last match, like, there wasn't even a post-match on-court interview. And here she was, the greatest player, you could argue Martina or her, greatest player of our time then. This, we didn't think about things like how you send somebody off. We actually brought her into our little studio. Ash wasn't built at that time. It was Armstrong Stadium that they played on, and this tiny little studio to do a post-match interview in our studio. And just think of how this whole industry, this whole business has come forward with how we present things. It was quite remarkable.
Yeah. Do you think some of that has to do with previous experiences? I'm sure that's part of it. And saying, I wish we could have done that, but also technology and how it's grown so that it is more readily available, maybe at a lesser cost as well?
Sure. I mean, it's just, I'm a big fan of what ESPN Tennis and Jamie Reynolds and that whole group do. But they have taken this whole presentation of the U.S. Open to another level. I mean, their sets look beautiful. Their talent's first rate. Their production people, Bobby Feller and James Davis, and producers and D-Mob and Schwabi and the directors, they just do a great job of presenting this. It's just, that's what people have come to expect. When you turn on the primetime ESPN U.S. Open show, you're getting quality television, and they don't miss a beat. They really don't. And I think that it's really come down to what people are expecting right now.
The thing that I've appreciated from you as well, and again, I do look at your Facebook posts, and they're really cool, and you have a way of relating with people, and I think that shows. You've taken pictures of your crew, and I think that's great because it does show how important people who work behind the scenes are. So we're going to go through a rip of photos here, and I just want to get some brief thoughts on each one as they come up.
Okay. Well, in this picture is Sam Gore and Luke Jensen, who host the show, and Steve Turnberger there on camera left, directing it, and I produce it, and Andrew McConville is a really key AD, feature producer, and a lot of I try to get the technicians out there, the camera guys, stage managers, the guys the audio and tape ops, because as I like to think, and I know, and if everything doesn't work technically, we can put together great features and have great coverage of our tennis and do great between match segments. But if mics go down and cameras go down and the transmission has a problem, the stories don't get out there. So I try to make everybody get on out for this set to kind of thank people, everybody on every level of what we do.
The monitor on set, the cameras.
It's quite a production. There's a lot going on, and we have the great thing about doing these shows, and what we do is the ESPN Directv production that goes to Directv on 5 different channels covering 5 different courts, and also goes to ESPN Plus if you have that streaming service. And this is Jeff Purley, the greatest stage manager on the planet, who makes it all work on the sets, telling me where people are going to sit and how things are going to happen out there. This show is, the Directv shows, we are basically producing a show that we're not cutting tennis, we are producing the segments between the time matches end and the next match walks on. So we'll take on those 5 courts. We'll take the post-match on-court interview, and then it's our job to fill with information and entertainment until the next match comes on. And that could be 8 minutes, could be 12 minutes, or 15 minutes. But what we do is we record segments throughout the day with Patrick McEnroe or John or Chrissy Everett or Pam Shriver or James Blake, Brad Gilbert. They'll come into our studio and we'll have segments ready for them to record. And then when matches end, we'll either do a live segment with them or we'll feed a taped element to that channel. So we are basically programming 5 channels at once, and there's times when we're just in a routine of recording segments and playing back segments. But then, as we talked the other day, there can be a time when 3 matches end at once, and we're about to have a guest that just won, a player that just won, come into our studio. So we're doing that while on the other 4 channels feeding out recorded segments that fill that time. So it can be pretty hectic, but that's what I love about the job.
I've been in those situations myself, and it is a lot of fun, but you definitely have to be on top of everything. We talked about talent a little bit in there. What is the relationship between an announcer and a producer, and a producer and a reporter? Because each one has a different role, and an analyst. How would you describe what your mission is when working with announcers?
Well, Donna, I have to say that, I have been very fortunate to work with some really talented people over the years. And the show is only as good as what's being presented. And a lot of the on-air talent get entirely too much criticism and in some cases praise for what goes out there, but they are what the American audience sees. And so the pressure is really on them. This is a shot of Cliff Drysdale, Sam Gore and Luke Jensen at the Australian Open a few years ago. I worked with Cliffy when I first took over ESPN Tennis, when I got an offer from IMG and TWI. They own the ESPN tennis production rights, and I was hired to produce those shows. And Cliffy was my play-by-play guy, and he's a legend, Lord Drysdale, as we call him, a legend in the business and one of the original ESPN announcers. And he certainly knows a whole lot more about the sport of tennis than I do. And when I first took over back in 1990 with Cliffy and Fred Stolle and Mary Carrillo, and later Vitas Gerulaitis joined us, they had their ways of doing things. And they did a great job. And I can remember my first production meeting, and I had a format. We sat down, and I said, "Here's what we're going to do. This is what the tease is going to say, and then we're going to go into highlights from the previous match with these players, and then we're going to do some graphics." And Cliffy looked at me, and Freddie said, "Brian, come on the air, turn our mics on, and let us do it." I said, all right, well, we got to have a compromise here. So actually, It was a joke. We had some fun with it. But, the thing and I didn't really grow up playing serious tennis. I played a little bit. But the idea is, I really decided that, if I'm going to get good at this producing tennis, I'm going to need to listen to Cliff Drysdale and Fred Stolle and Vitas Gerulaitis, right? And Mary Carrillo.
Yeah.
So that relationship was, I'm listening to them, and we're basically reacting and showing them the pictures and giving them the elements, the graphics, the replays that make it all make sense. And
right.
and this Patrick McEnroe and Steve Turnberger, director down in Australia. As I learned, and as young producers are learning today, you can do all the preparation, and you can do all of you can make great features and great tape elements, that kind of thing. But if you're not able to listen to your play-by-play guy and your analyst during the game, you're missing something, because you have to support what they want to talk about. They're the experts, and it's our job to give them the video materials, the graphic materials, the right shots, the director and the producer, to support what the stories they're trying to tell. And that's, that only comes over time. And I mean, I really enjoyed working with Cliffy and Fred and that group. And when I did hockey, working with Sam Rosen at Madison Square Garden Network, and John Davidson, the best analyst of his time. He's in in the business of with the St. Louis Blues and Columbus team now. But when he was an analyst, he was the best. And I only got to know the hockey game by making sure I listened to John Davidson call the game and Sam Rosen call the game.
You'd mentioned Doc Emmerich as well.
Yeah. When
A couple of days ago.
When I only worked at USA Network for a little over a year, and I got offered a job to produce the New Jersey Devils games for Madison Square Garden Network, and I jumped right at it because I was living in New York at the time, and I was a Devils and Rangers fan, and in the first meeting I went to, Pete Silverman, who was the executive producer at the time, introduced me to Doc Emmerich and Mike Eruzione. Those were going to be my play-by-play and analysts for taking over the New Jersey Devils games, and how great was that? You know, Doc is a legend, and Mike, obviously, with his Olympic heroics and a great, both of them were great to work with. And you know, that was my first hockey game, having the two of them in the booth and doing the show with them, and that was awesome. And then about a year and a half later, I was asked to take over the Rangers games. And Sam Rosen was doing play-by-play, and Phil Esposito was my analyst, and John Davidson was down in the locker room doing interviews. And then Phil ended up taking over the Rangers, and John moved up to the booth. But you know, having those guys to work with was just an honor and a real pleasure to work with. And I also tell this story to people. And I did the Rangers for 7-8 years with JD and Sam, and I saw more of them than I did of my wife, for sure, because we traveled together all the time. And on nights off, you know, I would be over at John Davidson's house, and he'd have his dish going, watching the American game here and the Canadian game on another dish, and telling me everything about every player, and really learn the game from him. And then when we got into the game, you know, there's, as you know, they're on headset, and we're in the control room, producer, director, and we're communicating, but they have a talkback button where they can hit the talkback button, and John Davidson could talk directly to me, the producer, in the control room without that going over the air. So as soon as the Rangers scored a goal, JD was on the talkback, bring it back to Greshner's hit in mid-ice. That's where he wanted to see the replay. And I get frustrated now occasionally when I watch hockey where there's a breakaway and you see 3 angles of the puck going in the net. Well, that breakaway took place in center ice where the defenseman whiffed on a pass, and the goal scorer picked up the puck. If you don't take it back to that point, you don't see it. So JD would always be on and after a while, he didn't need to do that, but that's how that communication between the producer and the talent works and really helps to tell the story.
You mentioned, you know, not queuing up the puck at the right spot. I've seen that in my career, and when I was early, that was kind of what I was doing, was just showing what you think is obligatory.
Yeah.
But somebody told me back then that a producer is almost considered a third announcer. You never see him or hear him, but they are in the ears of the announcers, telling them sometimes what they need to do, stay on track with the story, queuing up this replay here. So it's a two-way street in that regard. How would you describe it?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, you really have to be thinking along the same lines with your play-by-play and your analyst when it comes to game time. Because, and again, it gets back to listening to them. I mean, if they're talking about some statistic that you know, Aaron Judge, home runs and RBIs, and you're not supporting it with the right graphic information, you're not doing your job, right? And the same thing in any sport. If they're talking about in tennis, if they're talking about this two-handed backhand that Andre Agassi is just turning over and delivering, you want to show not just the camera 2 angle, the end zone angle, but you want to show that camera 3 angle where you see his grip and you see that two-handed backhand and you see what he's doing special to put the other player in a defensive mode. And you have to listen to what they're saying and support it with the right video.
Yeah, and I also like to make the comparison that broadcast is a lot like a hand. Like if you have a cut on your finger, it's not going to work as well. If you're broken finger, it's not going to work as well.
Yeah.
So, but as the producer, you have to kind of keep everybody in line on that. The director handles the visuals, but the camera guys are directing themselves to
Sure.
sell the right shot because as a director, and you know this as a director, when you can just take a shot instead of directing that cameraman into the shot, it makes your life so much easier. And the broadcast is much more valuable because you're not bogged down by a lot of the stuff that you don't need to be bogged down by.
Sure, sure, and doing more directing now. The technology is so great. Your best camera guys are listening to program. They're hearing the announcers in they're not only listening to the director, but they're hearing play-by-play in their headsets. So when the analyst or the play-by-play guy says something, right away that camera too is on the bench shooting the player he just talked about. I mean, the guys that are really good and are doing that.
Yeah.
And that to me, we didn't have that 20 years ago.
Right.
And so it was things took a little more time. But now your best directors make sure their play-by-play is heard in the announcer's headset or the camera guy's headset, so they're reacting right along with the director.
And again, graphics, selling the right graphic, as you mentioned, the playback area, queuing the replay up, so you don't have to ask for that. How valuable is an AD to, a stage manager to helping assist talent?
Yeah, I mean everybody. Stage manager. Jeff Pearl, the guy I just mentioned. Before I even say anything to him, he's told me that the players that we're about to interview are making their way to the set, and he's got their microphones standing by, and they're going to be in chairs 1, 2. And Sam and Luke are going to be in chairs 3, 4. I mean, and the monitors are pointed in the right direction so they can see what they need to see. That's critical. And same thing with your EVS operators. I mean, when you work with people enough in this business and your producer, your tape ADs or producers, you work with enough people, they know what you're looking for before you even tell them what you're looking for. And that's why every show I do, I try to put a list together of the EVS operators I'd like, the audio guy I'd like or lady, and see what I can do to get the people on the show that make me look good.
Yeah.
Because that is what it's all about. I mean, it really is a team sport, what we do. And if you have people that you're comfortable with and who know what you're looking for, that's half the battle.
Yeah. Now you're a big golf guy. I do have a picture of you at I believe it's the Old Course, the British Open. Tell me what we're seeing here.
Well, fortunately, I had the opportunity, and my good buddy Don Colantonio put this together, where for Directv we would do much like we do with the tennis shows, where we would have different channels covering, in addition to what the network is showing. This was the last year, I think 2015 at St. Andrews. ESPN was their final year of doing the British Open. And that year, I think I did what was called the 17th hole channel, where we showed everybody on the 17th hole. That's Don right there. This is Muirfield 2013, that shot. But we had... what we did was we provided, I think, 4 channels, and if you watch, for instance, CBS for the Masters, you can watch the Amen channel where you're just seeing the Amen holes. You can watch the 16th hole. Every player play the famous par 3 16th hole. You can also watch feature pairings. I'll tell you a quick story of what I think was the greatest example of how effective this programming can be. In 2014, Tiger Woods returned to Royal Liverpool for the British Open, and he had his personal problems in 2009, right? And really hadn't done anything. But back in 2006, he won his last British Open at Royal Liverpool. And Don said to me, all right, we're going to do the Royal Liverpool 2014, and we'll have our multiple channels. And I want you to do the featured pairings channel. And we're going to try to get Tiger Woods all 4 days. So it could not have worked out better. In that Tiger played well, shot 69, I think, first round of the 2014 British Open. So the network ESPN covered a lot of his shots. But the second round, he shot 77. So he was off the leaderboard. We covered every one of his shots the first round on Thursday and the second round on Friday. But now the network wasn't showing Tiger Woods because he wasn't on the leaderboard, ESPN. But if you wanted to watch Tiger Woods in every shot, you had to have ESPN 3 at that time or Directv. And we showed Tiger all 4 rounds. He made the cut, fortunately. But it wasn't a factor, so ESPN didn't show much of him, and ABC on the weekends. But we showed he finished the tournament 6 over par, so he hit 294 shots, and we showed every one of his 294 shots. And let me make a correction. We showed 293 because on Saturday he was playing with Jordan Spieth and hit the tee ball into the heavy gorse and just grabbed the club from his caddy and went over and whacked it out of the woods, out of the weeds. And we were showing Jordan Spieth when he hit that. So we showed 293 of 294 Tiger Woods shots at the 214 British Open.
Yeah, it can be very focused on one player, but it's still entertaining.
Yeah, it is.
So talking about Tiger, you do have a little bit of a history with him. I want, for people who are listening to this, feel free to visit Brian's website, brianwilliamstv.com. He does have a clip on there of what he had done with Tiger. But Brian, I'll let you describe or explain what you did with Tiger back before he won his first Masters. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the greatest influence on my career was Mark McCormick, the founder and owner IMG, who, when I was working for IMG, walked into my office in the fall of '96 and said, "We're doing a documentary on Tiger Woods, and you're doing it." And I said, "What doing it? He hasn't won anything. I mean, great amateur career, of course." And he said, "Well, then you have to go down and make the presentation to him and his dad and Team Tiger." In next month, and to sell him on the idea that we want to do a documentary on him. And Mark, I found out later, had already done a deal with Sean McManus at CBS Sports, the new president of CBS Sports, to air this documentary on before the final round of the 1997 Masters. So we did. I did the presentation, and he agreed to do the show that day. It was December 17, 1996. And we had to sell him on the idea that, yes, we would follow him with cameras for the next 4 months, but we wouldn't take up too much of his time. And I actually interviewed him 5 times during those months, and went to Thailand with him when he played the Asian Open, and interviewed his mom there and his dad later on. But we put this documentary together. Jim Nance hosted it. Tony Lanning, outstanding director, directed it. Jaime Diaz, Sports Illustrated, wrote it. And it was really I think, a great 1-hour show, talking to everybody, Jack and Arnie and Lee Trevino and Byron Nelson and Phil Knight and Mark McCormick, about what he could bring to the sport. But if he doesn't make the cut at the 1997 Masters, this 1-hour documentary that's to run on the Sunday before the final round really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, he shoots a 40 on the front 9 on Thursday, and we're all nervous. Shoots a 30 on the backside for a 70. I think he shot 66 the next day and ran away with the tournament. I remember Friday when he made the cut, Jim Nance coming down and giving me a high five and saying, okay, the thing's going to air and he's going to be at least playing on Sunday. Well, he goes on to win the tournament by 12 strokes, and that's his first Masters win, 1997 Masters, and just shows you how brilliant Mark McCormick was, and give credit to Sean McManus too for saying, okay, we need to do this.
Right. And there was, from my understanding, when we talked the other day, there was a little bit of negotiation that you had to do in order for that to happen with his dad, Earl.
Yeah, the fact is, when it came to doing the interview with Earl Woods, the dad, the creator, I saved that to the end, and it was going to be late February that year. Yeah, I think it was the end of last week in February, and we couldn't do it without him. But I wanted to save him to last, because this was going to be, other than Tiger, the most important interview, and I did all the interviews myself, and I called Earl 2 days before. I mean, we weren't texting or emailing back then, but I called him 2 days before, and he said, I can't do it. And I said, what do you mean you can't do it?
Yeah.
You have to do it. And he said, nah, it just didn't work out. And he didn't hang up on me, but we ended the conversation. And I said, Earl, we're going to be there Tuesday at 2:00 as planned for the interview. And so I knocked on the door, and he opened it up. As it turns out, I would later find out that he and Coltita, his wife, were splitting at that time. Literally, he had in the background Tiger's, clubs, and his trophies and his medals in boxes, because he was moving out of the house. But once we rolled tape and we got the camera going, 2 hours and 15 minutes later, he answered every question, and he was gracious, and he was wonderful, and said things that we couldn't have done the documentary without, and that's I'm thankful for that. And then, like I said, could not have been nicer, and I was prepared. I had my 40 or so questions, and he thanked us at the end, and liked the documentary.
And as part of the start of that, you negotiated for a round of golf with Tiger?
That was going to be a reward.
Okay.
Mark McCormick said, if you convince him that you're the guy to do the show, you get to play 18 holes with him at Isleworth, where we did the presentation, and that was one of the thrills of my golf career. And I don't have much of a golf career, but I do remember that the opening tee ball, with him standing on the tee right next to me, after he hit his shot. He was playing from the tips, and we were playing from the members' tees, the foursome I was with. I did hit my best drive of the day right down the middle, and I was sweating it, but it was good. And he was great. He was fun to play with. He didn't give me any tips along the way, but he did make a couple of comments about things I should be doing a little differently. So I'm thankful for that. It was a pleasure.
And I know that was before he really made it superstar level. But what were you able to converse with him and have? Have conversations? Talk about different things. You said you didn't get many tips, but did you have conversation? And if you did, what did those entail?
No, he to be honest with you, other than the interviews we were allowed to do with him that I did, and a couple of specialty shots on the range we shot with him to give us certain things we needed for the documentary, he was all business. I mean, he was all business. And on that day, he was in his own cart. The other, four of us were in two different carts, and he hit from the back tees and we hit from the front tees.
Yeah.
And he was all business. And I remember one hole where he bogeyed one. I think he shot 65 that day. He bogeyed one hole, and he hit a bad sand shot that flew the green. He went back and hit 20 balls from that same position until he sunk one. And he said, okay, now we can go on. He was all business. Even at that age, 18 years old, 19 years old, he was all business. And I didn't try to make small talk with him, but he was nice as could be. He was gracious, but he was concentrating on his game.
You've been in the presence of some great athletes, Tiger Woods, Billie Jean King, over the years, I imagine, and you just did something with the Intercollegiate Women's Tennis Hall of Fame.
Yes. Every 2 years now, the ITA, Intercollegiate Tennis Hall of Fame, Women's Hall of Fame on the College of William and Mary inducts new inductees, 4 inductees every 2 years. And I produced the event along with Tyler Thompson and other members of the committee. And this year, Diane Donnelly Stone was inducted, great player from Northwestern who played doubles with Katrina Adams. In their senior year, they didn't lose a match. They won the NCAA doubles championship. And she was just a wonderful person. And she has lived her entire life with type 1 diabetes. And and she, after graduating from Northwestern, had a brief pro career, but then went to work for Billie Jean King as her executive assistant and helping her with World Team Tennis. So when Diane was inducted last weekend, Billie Jean said, "I'm going to be there, but I'm there just to congratulate Diane Donnelly. I really want to be there for her." That's what Billie Jean is all about. And she took some pictures with everybody, and she could not have been nicer. But she was there to say thank you and to tell Diane Donnelly Stone that she inspired Billie Jean King, and that's just what Billie Jean King is all about. I often people ask me who's the most famous person you've ever met. She would be right at the top because of what she's done, not just in tennis, but in the world, for whatever cause you want to talk about. She has been up front and front and center with things she believes in. And I often say, the world is a better place because of Billie Jean King.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what I appreciate from, again, all my colleagues having had these experiences. And you'd never know until you sit down with them and talk to them. It's like, oh, you were on that event. Oh, you worked with them. What was it like? And just hearing stories like this, it's just great. And so thank you for sharing a lot of that with me. What are some of the more memorable events that you've produced over the years or been a part of?
Well, one of my favorite events is New York City Marathon. We talk about marathons, and having the opportunity to produce the 2001 New York City Marathon, where it was 7 weeks after 9/11. That was a special event, and we of course we covered the lead pack, and we covered that story of the race, but we did so many features and so many elements for the race on young people that were running for their dads that were in the Twin Towers when they went down, firemen running for other firemen that died that day, policemen. They have the Mayor's Cup every year where the firemen run against the policemen of New York City for the Mayor's Cup. It's a fun race, but they go at it. They really, it's the top runners from each of the fire departments and the police departments. But that was special that year because of what went on. And, so that, to me, and I guess timing's everything, was producing it that year and just being able to be a part of New York City coming back to life, because at that time the Yankees and the Mets and the Giants and the Jets had resumed play, but everybody that went into Yankee Stadium or Shea Stadium or the Meadowlands were you had to go through metal detectors. It's a different story when your 2 million people are lining the streets of New York City. So the security was heightened, and we weren't told all the details, but we knew that the security. And we even had, that year it was on NBC, we even had talks, what happens if something happens on the course? They're going to take over our truck to cover the event, right? So that was a special year to do the New York City Marathon. That's right up there.
Yeah, and we mentioned at the beginning the Boston Marathon. You told me when we talked a couple of days ago that you were not there the year of the bombing. I happened to be there. It was an experience. I'll just say that. But you the next year were back, and you pretty much had to do the same thing you did for that 2001 marathon, right? We had to recap everything and make people appreciate the tragedy but move on. And how did that affect you?
Well, the reason I wasn't there that year is because and I've been producing the Boston Marathon since 2008. 8 or 9. But I wasn't there. It's the only year I've missed, 2013. And at the time, I was still doing the world feed for the Masters. I did the Masters for 22 years, the world feed there. And that one year, because of the way the calendar fell, normally there's 8 days between the final round of the Masters that Sunday and then Patriots Day 8 days later in Boston, the Monday of the running of the Boston Marathon. But that year, for some reason, the Boston Marathon was moved up, and so it fell on the day after the Masters. So I couldn't do both, and I had to do the Masters. So I asked a good buddy of mine, Steve Mayer, to cover for me, and Bruce Troit was directing. And on that day, very often, I was able to play Augusta after working the shows, and on media day I was able that day to play the course, which was a thrill. But I'm driving back at about 3:30 in the afternoon that day, because I live in Raleigh, North Carolina now. I was driving back from Augusta, got in my car and driving back, and I just turned the radio on and I'm hearing the story of the bombing of the Boston Marathon. And I'm saying, what? The bombing of the Boston Marathon. So I'm listening to this, and the first thing I thought of course, is all of you guys on site, including Bruce Troit, the director, Steve Mayer, and everybody else, and everybody that I know and had been working with the past 5 years. Is everybody okay? And I couldn't get through. Could not get through until 6 o'clock that night because, of course, with security, they shut down all cell lines. And so I did not know until finally talked to Bruce Troit that night. About 6 o'clock, he called me back and said he's got phone service, and yes, everybody was okay, and that was great to hear, believe me. And I often wonder, because like you, I when we're off the air and the world feed gets off the air at about 12:30, and that first bomb went off at 2:49, and I like to go out and spend a couple hours at the finish line just watching the race, which we don't get a chance to do when we're producing it, and say thank you to people and see people that I missed. And I might have been right there. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what that means, but I just don't know where I would have been. Maybe I wouldn't have been right there, but would have been in the area someplace.
Yeah, it was definitely. I said it before. It was an experience that you really don't want to relive. But yeah, the communications got shut down about 15 minutes after we had to evacuate the area, and then it was just a waiting game. And because we were separated from some of our crew as well, so I can understand the angst that you were experiencing as well. But fortunately, everyone on our crews were good, and it really makes you think of the evacuation plan that they put into the site surveys now. So, but yeah, it was an experience that I'm grateful for in many ways, because it makes you realize what's important in your life. So,
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so talk about the impossible jump, because you had mentioned to me a couple of days ago that was a memorable event for you as well.
Yeah, the impossible jump, and this was another Don Colantonio production with EOE, ESPN Original Entertainment. What we were doing was Mike Metzger was going to do a backflip on his motorcycle over the fountains at Caesar's Palace. And it was one of the first shows that ESPN, and this was May 4th, 2006. It was one of the first shows that they were going to not only distribute worldwide, but stream on ESPN streaming service. They were going to test it out, as I understand it. And it was great. It's the only show I ever worked with the outstanding, talented director Ralph Mollet, and Susie Colbert hosted it. And the first thing that I wanted to do, if we're going to do this show with Mike Metzger doing a backflip, we have to get with Evel Knievel, and we have to get his footage of when he broke every bone in his body 40 years earlier, 1967, and we have to get that footage, and we need Evel to be there to be on site to watch this, and also some of the other Travis Pastrana and some of the other Matt Hoffman, some of the other daredevils of that time need to be there to watch this. They're all buddies of Mike Metzger, and if he's going to do this thing, we need to cover it right. So I was, and I didn't realize it until we called Evel Knievel. He was living at the time down in Florida, and said, we want him there, and we want his footage. And he owned it. ABC didn't own it. Wide World of Sports didn't own it. Evel Knievel owned it. So I spent 4 or 5 nights, and he called me every name in the book, because what he wanted for the money.
Again, negotiation.
Yeah, negotiations. We ended up settling on $10,000 for his footage of him crashing at Caesar's Palace in 1967, and we picked that up, and we were able to put that on the show, because you can't show this thing. We also sent him 2 first class tickets. So he would be there to interview him and be a big part of the show, and he never made it. He I don't know what he did with the tickets, but he died a year later, so he was not in good health. Yeah. So he didn't make it, but he never got in touch with. He just didn't show up. But we did the show, and it was really, you talk about a show that you. That just everything went right. Great crowd on hand, great day. Mike did everything we asked of him, Mike Metzger, because we did a 1-hour show. He was going to set the Guinness World Book of Records by going 112 feet in the air and doing a backflip and landing it clean on the ramp. But that only takes 90 seconds. Yeah. So we had some entertainment. We showed, we did a bunch of interviews, and we made sure that he went up 3 times and almost jumped on his takeoff and stopped, and then went back again. The drama, right? Yeah. And he did it beautifully. He did it beautifully, and he nailed it. 112 feet in the air. He almost flew the ramp, the landing ramp. He went more than 125 feet, and it was only built for 125. But his back wheel caught the ramp, and he landed. The only thing he did wrong was, because his girlfriend and 2-year-old son were there, he decided he was going to say, "Now we're going to Disney World." That was not part of the deal, but he said, we're going to Disneyland instead of Disney World. So I don't think it was ever used, but that's the only thing he did wrong. Otherwise, he was great, and he did everything we asked of him. It was quite a show.
Well, and again, when we talked the other day, you mentioned that is one of the memorabilia that it really has some meaning to you. So here's what it looks like, and it's just basically a signed poster. Yeah. Thanks for making the impossible jump, 125 feet. Yeah. They're a different breed for sure, the guys that do that kind of thing. Yeah. Are you able to develop relationships with some of the people, in this case would be a notable figure, or do those just kind of come here and there? Yeah, over the years, I've developed relationships with a lot of the tennis players, and Billie Jean King I consider a friend, and she often laughs about the early times we met. When I did the hockey, I became good friends with all the New York Rangers players, including John Van Beesbrook, who now oversees U.S. Olympic teams. And John was the goaltender at the Rangers at the time, and we did features together. And I played golf with him like every weekend for years there. And Marcel Dion, when he was playing with the Rangers, and it was a good golfing buddy. And Michel Bergeron, the coach. We got to be good friends, and so yeah, you do build up relationships with people, but also you have to kind of keep your distance too. If you're going to be covering them, as you know, there's times when you're showing things where they're not at their best, I guess, and you got to be honest with your on-air talent, mostly them being somewhat critical of the way the team is playing or that player is doing wrong, and because everybody can't win.
There's got to be times. So to answer your question, yes, I have become friendly with a lot of players along the way, but and keep in touch with a lot of players. Yeah.
I just want to let people know that Brian has won a multiple numbers of Emmys. He's made a huge contribution, not just domestically to the sport and sports broadcasting world, but internationally. So, next time you're taking a look at some of these global events, more than likely Brian will have had a hand or is having a hand in the production. So, Brian, I do want to ask, though, before we actually go, what is your favorite sports movie?
I have a lot that I love, but there's only one that stands so much above the others that it's not even close. Caddyshack. Caddyshack is, I could watch Caddyshack every day and find new things to laugh at, whether it's Bill Murray or Rodney Dangerfield. I love that movie. So Caddyshack is right there.
Okay, well, I'm not going to let you go that easy. What are some of the favorite quotes from that movie? Because you could probably quote the whole film.
You must have been something before electricity.
I always love the part with Spalding, though. Anything Spalding is hilarious to me.
Yes. No, I loved it. A lot of fun.
All right, Brian. Well, thank you again for your time. Again, if people want to see a little bit about the Impossible Jump, a little bit about Tiger Woods, and maybe just a little bit more about Brian's history, visit BrianWilliamsTV.com. Brian, again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing time with me, and look forward to hearing about your next event.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to your next movie.
Brian is not only talented and a great negotiator, he collaborates with his crew to make sure the viewers at home enjoy the events that they watch. I truly appreciated my time with him, and I look forward to watching anything he produces in the future. Again, if you'd like to find out more about Brian, visit BrianWilliamsTV.com. For more Sports in the Making podcast episodes, visit our YouTube page, Sports in the Making, or take a listen on your favorite audio podcast platform. Also, be sure to check out Twitter @SportsMaking, as well as the Facebook page. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making. I'm Don Cardona.